Manx Murders, adapted from his book by Keith Wilkinson. Read by Mark Clift. The Murder of Edith Annie Cooper.
Edith Annie Cooper came from Shirley, Birmingham. She worked as a barmaid at the Kensington Hotel in High Street, Birmingham, and after this position came to the Isle of Man in 1888 or 89 to work in the Central Hotel Douglas. It was whilst working there as a barmaid that she met her future husband, George Barker James Cooper, who was described by many as a flamboyant character. George had developed a reputation as something of a womanizer, and on one occasion eloped with a married woman, with whom he travelled to America. After living with her there for some time, he returned and was later given a beating by the woman's husband. His first marriage ended in acrimony, his wife obtaining a divorce on the grounds of his cruelty and infidelity. Edith and George Cooper were married in 1891 in Shirley Church, but the marriage was to be short-lived, ending in tragedy, and a trial that was to become one of the most sensational ever in the Isle of Man. Following their marriage, the pair made several trips to the Isle of Man and always stayed at the Regent Hotel on Loch Promenade, Douglas. On the 2nd of September 1892, when George Cooper was 39 and Edith 25 years old, they travelled to Douglas from Fleetwood by boat. After arriving in Douglas, they went to the Regent Hotel. The following morning, George Cooper came down about 8 a.m. for breakfast and left the hotel around 9 a.m. in order to attend to some business. He then met Mr. Bradshaw, a portrait painter and photographer, and the pair visited a local bank before returning to the hotel. Mr. Bradshaw waited downstairs in the smoke room while Cooper went up to his room. When he did not return, Mr. Bradshaw left the hotel. Cooper, meanwhile, had ordered a small bottle of champagne, and a maid had taken this to the bedroom he occupied with his wife. Shortly after this, another maid, who was working in a nearby bedroom, overheard an argument between George and Edith, and not long after this heard a woman's scream and a thud, as if a body had fallen to the floor. The maid summoned help from the hotel manager, who, in the company of the head porter, went to the bedroom and demanded entry. When Cooper opened the door, they were shocked to find the apparently dead body of Edith lying on the floor, naked, with her husband standing over her. The manager saw that there was a wound in the left side of her chest, which was bleeding. The head porter then went for the police. George Cooper was arrested and taken away for questioning. As he was leaving the bedroom, he exclaimed, oh my God, let me kiss her before I am taken away." The inquest was opened that same afternoon in the Regent Hotel in front of Mr. Samuel Harris, the coroner for Douglas. George Cooper described going up to the room after leaving Mr. Bradshaw downstairs following their trip to the bank. His wife was lying on the bed and complained of feeling unwell. He clipped his nails with a penknife which had been lying on the dressing table. An argument ensued between the pair, and she had slapped his face. He retaliated, not realizing that the knife was still in his hand, and Edith cried out, "George, you have cut me." He saw that there was a wound on her chest, he explained, but thought initially it was only trivial. After extensive summing up by the prosecution and defence, the jury found an indictment for murder. Cooper's trial started on Monday, the 14th of November 1892. A witness at the trial was Robert Callan, a warder at the Isle of Man jail. He told the court that Cooper had been in the jail since the 9th of September and on Sunday the 11th of September he had written a letter. Callan remembered that it was addressed to Mrs. Harold Cooper, but could not remember any other details. He had taken the letter to the gaoler's office. William Fale, another gaoler, remembered that the address was 38 Richmond Street, New Brighton, Liverpool. Mrs. Miranda Jackson then explained that she owned the house in New Brighton and had let it to a lady called Mrs. Cooper. A few weeks later she met a man at the house whom she now identified as George Cooper, who was introduced to her as Mrs. Cooper's husband. The Mrs. Cooper living in New Brighton was identified by several witnesses as a Mrs. Hunt, who was being divorced by her husband, Arthur Earl Hunt. It was Hunt who had earlier given Cooper a thrashing after he eloped with his wife. 5 witnesses from Liverpool and Manchester then gave evidence that proved George Cooper was regularly seeing Mrs. Hunt, but she had then left the New Brighton address on the 13th of September, and despite intensive inquiries had not been traced. When the case for the defence began, Henry Buckingham, a steward on the Peveril boat, said he knew George Cooper and his wife. He described seeing the woman drink excessively on a trip from Liverpool about 3 weeks before her death, and said that by the end of the trip she was in a very intoxicated condition. He felt that Mr. Cooper was very kind to his wife. Other witnesses gave evidence that although Cooper was often the worse for drink, his wife was also often in a similar condition. After a trial lasting 6 days, the jury retired to consider their verdict on Monday the 21st of November, and after an hour and 3/4 returned to find that George Cooper was guilty of manslaughter. He was then sentenced to 10 years in prison. The spectators in the court were said to be astonished by the leniency of the verdict, as was the local press. The Mourners' Herald said the sentence was utterly inadequate. The English press, who reported the trial, stated that Cooper would probably have been found guilty of manslaughter if tried in England, given the description of his wife as nagging, drunken and quarrelsome, even though he himself had lived a life of gross overindulgence of every kind, and deserved not an atom of sympathy. Cooper was not removed from the court to the Isle of Man jail until people had dispersed, but the public was so incensed by the verdict they jeered the jury and had to be restrained by the police. Cooper was then taken to start his sentence. He was later transferred to a prison in England to serve his time.